Ukrainians hope their military's counteroffensive in the east could signal a turning point in the war. The ongoing operation has been so successful, the Ukrainian army has retaken more ground in 5 days than the Russians captured in the past 5 months. The city of Kharkiv has endured almost daily rocket attacks since April. On Sunday, a Russian missile strike took out the power grid, causing the city to go dark. It once held 1 million people, but is now relatively empty, and those who stayed live in constant fear of death from a Russian missile. Now, nearby villages feel hopeful as Ukrainian troops push the invaders out. As soon as the Russians were pushed out, police officers of the Ukrainian forces were coming in, investigating possible war crimes on Sunday. But the extent of how the village has been affected by Russia's occupation is only now being known. Detectives traveled to one property to retrieve the bodies of 2 men who had been allegedly shot by Russian forces. Despite the departure of Russian troops, these villagers now fear that their village, which is yet to have power restored, will have trouble coping ahead of the looming winter season. Kyiv's advances into the area has forced Russian troops to leave in a big hurry, leaving behind significant numbers of weapons and munitions in a hasty flight as the war marked its 200th day on Sunday. Ukraine's military claims its forces have recaptured about 3,000 square kilometers since the counteroffensive began in early September. Up until now, Russia has held a huge advantage in tanks and artillery, but the Ukrainians have figured out how to turn off-the-shelf technology into a force multiplier, making a commercial drone nearly equal to a Russian tank in combat power.
One of our soldiers with the technology, it's stronger than maybe 10 or 20 soldiers from Russia.
If you are unfamiliar with warfare, you might say that there was heavy fighting going on in this area where we are, in a place called Pisky in the southern part of Donetsk province. And though there have been artillery barrages going near constantly for the several hours that we've been here now, it doesn't necessarily qualify as a pitched battle. That's because the Russians are just randomly firing artillery pretty much all day long, all night long. They have a near limitless supply of that, but they're not really making any gains. And that's because the Ukrainians are fighting smarter. And in so doing, they can hold off the Russians, even though the Russians outnumber them about 50 to 1.
The technology now is good. When you have a mobile phone and you get fighting with the technology, this helps us to win.
A Russian tank costs about $4.5 million to build, while an off-the-shelf drone runs a little over $1,000. Since these tiny drones are responsible for destroying hundreds of tanks, that makes them priceless for these Ukrainian airborne troopers.
Rather than fight the Russian tanks head-to-head, we use the drones to spot the enemy positions, then pass that information on to our long-range artillery to be destroyed. The only thing we need is more ammo. If we had enough ammunition, the enemy wouldn't stand a chance.
Many of these drones and internet systems have been donated, courtesy of individuals giving to crowdfunding projects. For these troops who've been fighting without a break since the war began, it brings hope. They may soon get back to their loved ones.
So the two sides' objectives in this conflict, I think, are obviously fundamentally incompatible with one another. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has basically said that he won't stop fighting until Ukraine has reestablished control over all of Ukraine's territory. Putin, on the other hand, as long as the fighting, as long as the war isn't destabilizing his regime at home, isn't costing him too much domestically, I think he intends to keep fighting until he takes as much of Ukraine's territory as he can, until he destabilizes the government as much as he possibly can.
I tell my girls, I love you so much, that's why I stay here. My oldest daughter said, Papa, did you get shot? And I said, no, the Russians don't have the budget for that this year.
I don't think that the fighting will end anytime soon. Neither side has really exhausted its supply of weapons or people. I think both sides think that going into the winter especially, they'll be able to gain an advantage over the other, right? Russia believes that its ability to restrict gas shipments to Europe will give them more leverage and maybe make Ukraine's NATO friends push Ukraine to sort of settle. Ukraine, on the other hand, thinks that Russian forces aren't going to want to fight in the dead of winter, whereas Ukrainian forces are more motivated to defend their homeland. So I don't see an end to this. The fighting might sort of stabilize and ebb and flow. But in terms of actually stopping the war, I think at the very earliest, it would have to wait until the end of the winter, because I think both sides think they might be able to gain an advantage during the cold months.
I'm absolutely sure that we will win, but it's maybe not in this month, or maybe not to the end of this year, but it's as soon as possible. I'm absolutely sure that this is possible.
From the Donbass, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.